Hi, I'm Louise Mowbray, founder of Mowbray by Design and your host. Welcome to Lift, my conscious leadership podcast, Lead into the Future, today. I'm on a mission to bring you powerful insights and very human stories from leaders and entrepreneurs who are each, in their own way, contributing something noteworthy to shaping our world of work. Conscious conversations with people who are being conscious leaders and doing conscious business. My aim is to give you a personal lift to inspire you in your day-to-day business life. Make sure you subscribe now to never miss an episode. Today I'm talking to Michael Bociurkiw, the Global Affairs Analyst, writer, speaker and moderator. Michael writes from a lifetime of experience of news gathering in some of the most dangerous and difficult regions around the world. His interview roster is impressive, including prime ministers and presidents from a number of countries, and he's worked as an emergency spokesperson and communications expert with numerous relief organizations in more than 15 countries affected by war and disaster. Michael is a regular guest on BBC World, CNN International, Al Jazeera and Bloomberg, and writes regularly for CNN Opinion. He's based between Canada, Portugal and London. I wanted to find out more about his career.
I told myself life will never be the same again after this event, and I was right.
His perspective on conscious leadership and conscious business, and his upcoming book, Digital Crack, which tells the story of our 21st century addiction to smartphones and social media.
There's also this analogy that taking a device away from a child is like taking a crack pipe away from an addict.
So I wanted to chat to you, and I certainly loved the idea of your book, and I wanted to chat to you a little bit about that, but I also wanted to find out a bit more about you, what drives you, what gets you up in the morning, you describe yourself as a humanitarian, and not only do you describe yourself as a humanitarian, but everybody else does too. Where did this start? Give me a bit of potted history.
Well, I basically have two pillars to my career. The first one was journalism, and I entered journalism in a very unorthodox way. I actually applied for journalism school in Canada, was rejected because they said my marks were too low. So I took a BA in arts under mass communications, which is more theory of the media. But in a way, it better prepared me for the career I was going to pursue, because in mass communications, you learn a lot about ethics, about the proper way of doing things, sociology, psychology, that sort of stuff, the economy as well. So I kind of entered journalism with a splash. I broke a big story in Canada. I leaked a Royal Commission report, and it ended up on the front pages of our national newspaper. And then from there, one thing led to another. And when the crackdown was happening in China, I thought, well, I can't just sit idly, and I needed to go there. I knew I needed to go there to start reporting on that, very historic event. So I did. It went well.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you know you needed to go there? What was that thing within you that drove you?
Well, inside, I thought to myself, I can't sit on the sidelines of history and ignore this one. I had this gut feeling that it's going to be very historic, kind of turning point in China. Well, hindsight is 2020, but now we know that so-called pro-democracy revolution was quickly quashed. And it's interesting because I'm kind of now looking at what's happening in Hong Kong with the same kind of trained eyes. And, I actually, it's like history reliving itself.
Yeah,
I actually applied for a grant from a U.S. institution, a media institution, to go to Hong Kong because, again, I thought to myself, I cannot sit this one out. This is very, very big. So, again, it's a kind of tapping into your inner self and having, this comes over time, having a good idea of what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And so out of the blue, again, through a member of one of my networks, they called me and said UNICEF is looking for press officers to go to Afghanistan and the countries neighboring Afghanistan. And then that led to a staff position with UNICEF, which many call the world's most influential child's rights organization. And I was posted to arguably their most difficult position, which was East Jerusalem, dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that was really being thrown into the hot water. But went well. I had positions in Egypt and Pakistan, really all over the world, and including in New York, Toronto, and in Geneva as global spokesperson for a short time.
Yeah.
And also had a position with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's based in Vienna. And they posted me to Ukraine, where my parents came from. So that was in 2014. And it was around the time as well when that MH17 was blown out of the sky. So I kind of became de facto spokesperson for that. And it was that one event where I told myself life will never be the same again after this event. And I was right, because what that event did, it kind of launched me into the kind of global stratosphere, media stratosphere, where I was on every possible broadcast network and being quoted globally. So not to ignore the terrible tragedy of that event, but I think what happened there is I was able to combine my humanitarian background, my knowledge of aviation, my knowledge of media, to really do a great job, because we were the only eyes and ears of the world on the ground there. And I felt that, we were really doing this for the families of the victims. They could not come to the sites. Yeah, that really gave me a lot of exposure and connections, and hence here we are today as a global affairs analyst, where what I do now is I basically connect the dots of what's going on in the world, give perspective of what's happening based on all of the experiences and lessons learned, and also, as I mentioned, a very, very enabling network that is able to give me advice on why things happen as well.
Yeah, I watched both of your TED Talks, and I absolutely subscribe to relationships and global connectivity.
Yes.
And of course, you spoke a little, I think it was in perhaps your first TED Talk, about our addiction to screen time,
right?
Which, as far as I understand, lights up our brains like cocaine, which is a bit worrying, especially when you look at younger people. I think often one thing leads to another, and suddenly we're an expert in some particular arena. Perhaps not always choosing, but we land up somewhere and being an expert of something.
Right.
And if you had to choose your career again, and I'm not suggesting you should, but if you had to choose it again, would you hone it in the same way? Would you welcome the same experiences to bring you to the same point?
I think I would. I mean, I feel very blessed that I've been able to do what I've done. The work is very fulfilling, and you feel that you do have actually a bit of influence on, the way things happen. I mean, there is a bit of I suppose, emotional and personal cost, because your life is basically dictated by what happens in the world. It can take over, and there are many missed weddings, funerals, and parties, and trips, and that sort of thing. So, but I wouldn't change it for anything. I mean, it's being. I'm very, very blessed to have the platform that I do. But I do feel that I play a role in often raising the alarm bell. I mean, a few months ago, I wrote, for example, on climate change. And if we don't start doing things now, we're going to be in serious trouble. In fact, I really do feel that, I don't like to use the term we're screwed as humanity, but I think we've missed those warning bells, many of them, that should have influenced us to change our behavior quite some time ago.
So, Michael, just on the topics of conscious leaders driving conscious business and the simplicity of that, which really means that, we're awake, we're conscious, we're self-aware, and we manage ourselves better. And then really being aware of what's going on in the world and how our businesses and our actions and our stakeholders, the ones that we choose, have that direct and indirect impact on things like climate change and various other arenas. If I had to say conscious leadership to you and conscious business, what does it mean to you? Does it?
Well, I think as the term implies, it means being conscious. So the best example I can come up with right now is that, we're becoming an increasingly globalized society, a world, and things that happen thousands of kilometers away can affect our daily lives, our well-being. And again, going back to the work that I do, I like informing people of what's going on in the world so that they can make more conscious and bright decisions. The other part of being a conscious leader or decision maker, if you will, is also knowing what the impact of your business decisions will be. And I'm right now, because of my book, very much focused on big tech, the Facebook, Twitters, YouTubes of the world. And I think more and more the way their business models are designed, they have to, really figure out what their human impact is. And that if they continue to do things that actually damage people, then their shareholders, their boards, it's their responsibility to make a stance and say, hey, wait a minute, this is not good. It could eventually hurt our bottom line. We need to do something about it. You're familiar with the term impact investing. I mean, it's really catching on.
Very familiar.
Right. So I do see more and more companies where, for example, they could be doing Bitcoin between, out of Hong Kong, but some of their profits could go to help bring water to isolated communities in parts of Africa. You're seeing that happening more and more. So that's a very, very good trend, because a lot of the big traditional organizations, the UNICEFs of the world or World Food Programs, they're finding it increasingly difficult to raise money to do the things they traditionally did. So there's a much, much bigger role for the private sector. So that's why it's a good thing that this is happening now. And it's something I really encourage.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that, Michael. I often get really concerned that, of course, with day-to-day stresses and strains and the attention, economy and everybody being pushed and pulled in so many different directions, that people can often lose their true north. I mean, my great belief is that we are, as human beings, we have a desire to certainly not have a bad effect on anything around us. And with most people, it is a desire to do good, to assist and to lift up and lead in that way. And I think that my experience, certainly with leaders around the world in a bunch of different sectors and economies, is that it can become so incredibly stressful that one can actually lose sight. If you had to give some advice to leaders today in terms of how to be more conscious, how to have more awareness of the impact, the overall impact of their business on not only today but what is to come, what would your advice be?
It's a very good question. Well, I think one of the topics of my TED Talks was collaboration, and I think in today's day and age it's very, very difficult to operate. It's very difficult to operate consciously, to keep your compass, if you will, without collaboration, without having a group to help guide you. Even it could be a single mentor, or it could be your peers in the professional peers in the business community. I think we're much more impactful, much more powerful as a group rather than as singular individuals, whether you're a CEO or whether you're chairman of the board. When you start to interact with others in your sectors or with people from other sectors, it can be very helpful to you, because I think the world is changing so quickly. Things are happening that we have very little warning of, whether it's man-made or natural, that anything you can do to give more insight to yourself, to be able to predict what's going to happen weeks or months ahead of time, can be very helpful to you, not only as a business, but I think to your kind of whole social responsibility model. And, for example, this conference coming up, the one you invited me to, is very good for that sort of thing, because people exchange ideas, they network. So you can no longer operate in a very isolated cocoon these days. It can be very potentially dangerous thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just so delighted that South Africa has its own conscious companies awards, and I think the question of ethics is humongous. If we look at AI, for example, and I'd love your take on this.
Sure.
We know that only 7% of graduates out of the computer science field last year in the US were women, which means that the AI that has been written and that we will all be living for the rest of time has been written by young white American men. And if we consider that we all have loads of biases, and I think 180 identifiable, unconscious biases to go along with that, it's very worrying. And most people that I would talk to in terms of business and technology would tell me that AI is written, we're already into deep learning, never mind machine learning. And it obviously just replicating itself again and again. And that there is a tiny little window in biosciences and genomics to actually do something about the ethics around that before it follows the same course. Is this something that knocks on your door, or is something that you're familiar with?
Well, in the course of researching my book, I've had to pay attention to AI and what it does. And I think you brought up a very important point, that who is actually writing the code, the kind of underlying basis of a lot of these apps or smart devices. And I mean, on the one hand, when I do go to tech conferences, I do see more promotion of, for example, women going into coding, that sort of thing. But the numbers are still very, very minuscule. I think, again, we're at one of those points in time where I don't think it will be very easy to reverse. I'm looking at AI very closely and the way it's been used in intelligent speakers and apps. And I'm very worried about the way things have gone so far. And it's now commercially implemented where a lot of these apps that are based on AI, they almost know us better than we know ourselves. They can predict our behavior. I find that very scary, actually. And
It is hugely scary. That leads me to think I'm contributing to an innovation course with a fabulous a global company that I work with. And one of the elements that I also work quite a lot with futures, multiple futures, strategic foresight. And one of the things that we were looking at, really just to raise awareness, is China's social credit system and facial recognition.
yes.
Very interestingly, I was looking for a course the other day, a course that I wanted to do online, and clicked on a link, and I decided it wasn't the course for me. And then in the back of my mind, I thought, well, I'll leave it to AI. It'll produce a whole lot of other options.
Yes.
And within 2 days, I had, a course that had 4 times the amount of content for a tenth of the cost presented to me, and I bought it. So there are some occasions where you think, well, this is pretty useful. But apart from that, it can be pretty scary. Your thoughts on the China social credit system?
Well, I was in China not too long ago, not for a long period of time, but it is very worrying what's going on there, how they're kind of evaluating their own people, to use the word charitably for China, but really keeping tabs on them. And this social credit system, if I understand it correctly, will even, be able to determine where people move or where they settle or what type of jobs they get, permissions to travel. But it's not only the social credit system, it's the huge electronic eavesdropping infrastructure that is in place there. When you go to China, you'll notice facial recognition cameras everywhere, surveillance cameras everywhere. It's very daunting, in fact. And the other thing that is happening there is that, on the one hand, the government is collecting so much information on people, but on the other hand, it's very, very intensively blocking a lot of access to sites that other people use. So it's limiting Chinese nationals' ability to find out what's going on in the world. So it's a very controlling state, a lot of censorship, a lot of blocking going on. And it's such a contrast to what's happening in Hong Kong right now, where you do have this relatively free freedom of thought and access to all kinds of internet sites. There's no blocking going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, let's rewind a little, because we've alluded to your book, and I, for one, am very much looking forward to reading it when it's published. Give me a broad outline and the driver behind it. What led you to?
Yeah, so you might have noticed in my first TEDx talk, I did bring up the issue of screen addiction. I was doing research, and in the course of that, I discovered a very, very troubling fact, is that children as young as 2 are being given devices. And now we have enough research to show us what happens when they're given these devices, these very, very addictive devices at such a young age. They lose the ability to concentrate, they lose empathy. And what was very, very scary to me is that they even lose the ability, they have a diminished ability to read the expressions of their parents' faces. So, for example, the parent is angry and shows it in expression, the child doesn't know what that is. And that's aside from the other effects, the impact on the eyesight at such an early age, also the impact on posture. These are all things that we're going to be having to deal with soon. But, the statistics I've collected so far are quite worrisome. I mean, the book is called Digital Crack, The Hacking of Our Brains.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, great name.
Thank you. And that alludes to, so many experts have said that, these digital devices are, of course, very addictive in terms of what they do to our brains, the dopamine hit, that sort of thing. But also, I think that there's also this analogy that taking a device away from a child is like taking a crack pipe away from an addict. Look, at the end of the day, what's happening right now is online users are becoming younger. Today, for example, more than 80% of American children have a digital footprint established before the age of 2. That's even long before they even utter their first word or take their first step. And then by age 4, 3/4 of American children have their own device. And now 1 in 3 internet users worldwide is a child. And many go online daily with never powering down. In other words, the device is always with them. So in the United States, one interesting statistic is more than 90% of 13 to 7-year-olds go online daily, and about 75% have smartphones. Having said that, we're not that much better as adults. I mean, there are various figures floating around, but the average American adult picks up his or her phone probably 150 times a day. What's happening also is, especially in the kind of 20 to 30-year-old group, is that they may be picking up their devices less, but they're spending more time on those hits, if you will, checking Facebook or Twitter or whatever they have on their phones. So when you add up all of that time, I mean, they're spending years of their lives actually looking at the screen. I'm not setting out to tarnish the whole industry, tech sector, or devices, because there is a beneficial side to devices. You referred to one where you were served up these courses that you hadn't perhaps seen otherwise, but depression or loneliness, on the one hand, it can be caused by devices, but on the other hand, I have met people who have been helped out of their depression or loneliness or isolation because of devices, because of the networking effect. They can reach out to other people that are facing the same problems and get advice. The other aspect I'm looking at, which is very interesting, I've kind of become an amateur sociologist, is that because I travel a lot, I observe how devices are used. And a worrisome aspect for me is that when I travel, I mean, I used to really look forward to traveling because why? It gives me the opportunity to meet people, interact with people, meet people perhaps that I wouldn't have otherwise. But I'm finding that's happening less and less now, because when you walk through an airport or go through an airport lounge or sit down on the airplane, a lot of people are actually staring at the devices and missing the world going by. And to me, that's a very sad thing. I've actually written about that. What are we becoming as a society, whether we're teenagers or adults, where we're spending so much time looking at our devices that I think especially young people are losing the ability to socialize, to interact with people. I'll give you a quick example. I went to an addiction center just outside of Seattle. This is for hardcore gaming addicts whose parents pay a lot of money to send them to this addiction center where it's cold turkey. They have no technology whatsoever. The kids actually end up doing pretty well, but what you do notice talking to them is that they have problems stringing a sentence together or looking you in the eye. And this is after years and years of constant gaming or looking at their devices. And more of our daily kind of human interaction points, whether it's, going to the bank or filling up your car with petrol or doing all sorts of other things, shopping even. A lot of it is becoming automated to the point where we're no longer dealing with a human being. And I don't know where that's going to take us as a society, but it's something I'm looking at. Finally, if I can, I'm also, one of the unique aspects of this book is it's going to be looking at something called the digital divide. What I mean by that is there's a huge number of people in the world who are just now getting internet access for the first time. But they're not using, in your continent of Africa, many of them are there. They're not using these expensive devices yet. A lot of them are just using flip phones. But I'm going to be looking at that side of it. And then the other digital divide I'm going to be looking at is in the United States. There are communities where, for example, we find that if a household has an income of $30,000 or under, chances are is that they don't have broadband. So the children in the house aren't able to access a lot of services that way, maybe even do their homework. So they're at a disadvantage.
I think this digital divide is so important. I'm not sure if you know Don Tapscott. He was...
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Canadian.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Wrote Blockchain Revolution. And I forget his book before that, but I heard him speak in London, and that must have been about 12 years ago, perhaps 13. And he was talking about how his foundation in the US at the time had spent $5 million. What they discovered, of course, is that how we process information, if we've been attached to a screen for any time at all, is very different to those people who haven't. I'm not sure if he used that term at the time, but digital and economic divide. So the world, almost being split into people whose neural pathways will follow a similar pattern and those who won't.
Right.
And, if we look at all corners of the developed world, this is the common denominator. And what will it mean in terms of economy, in terms of growth, in terms of development, as the years tick by? And as you said earlier, it's become exponentially fast and complex and chewy, and it's not going to get any lighter.
Well, I can give you a little piece of good news. Is that one of the chapters, it's unavoidable, is going to be dating in the digital age. And in many developed countries, it's now at the stage where now more people are meeting online than offline. Of course, it has its good and its bad. And what it does is it does give people, say in small communities, a much wider kind of library of choice, if you will, if we can put it that way, to choose from. So it does act as a way to break isolation and to widen your kind of access to potential mate. But on the other hand, again, I don't want to end on doom and gloom, but a lot of people are, for example, breaking up online, or these days when one breaks up, it's very difficult for that breakup to be very solid. What I mean by that is that a lot of ex-partners still track each other once they've broken up. So that's a factor that people have advised me to look at as well. But again, where I'm trying to pick out the kind of bright spots in what I'm finding. And, the one thing about dating online is a lot of older folks are taking advantage of it now. And a lot of them are finding happiness that way. It's just, I think, again, being a responsible citizen or user of technology is, have your wits about you, your radar up, use the precautions that you would, finding a partner in the real world, and you should be okay. There are scams out there. Whatever app we use, we have to be cognizant of how much data they're actually collecting on us, what we've agreed. Read those terms of reference. I know it can be difficult sometimes to understand them, but be aware. Because we all have an increasing number of data points. I think the last number I saw in the movie Hacked was 5,000, which is a lot. Generally speaking, we've adopted this technology by agreeing that a lot of our data would be shared with these companies, and we expected them to act responsibly. Well, if Facebook taught us anything, is don't expect that to happen. And I think the other part of the good news is that I think big tech, Silicon Valley, is now realizing that if they don't start to act, put in more privacy safeguards, that they will be regulated. And I'm finding that very much here in Europe right now, is that the EU has really taken action and not only fined companies, but said, this is the way you're going to be doing business. So they better step up to the plate quickly and start doing that, because again, the US regulators are getting very impatient as well, and people are getting fed up. And I think a lot of people are turning away from Facebook because they don't trust it anymore. So it'll be very interesting to see where this goes, but definitely it's not all doom and gloom.
No, lots of amazing things that we can do today. And in fact, just keeping in touch with somebody like you over all of these years wouldn't have happened, without social media. Michael, when does your book launch? When can we expect to be able to buy a copy?
Well, I get asked that a lot. I am really rushing it. I'm hoping for a fall launch. But I've had so many people around the world help me with research or accommodation or all kinds of other things to make this happen. So I have a real responsibility to get it out soon. The one thing I do have going for me is my platform. I mean, I am on a lot of media, so once it does come out, it'll be very good, enabling to promote it. But you'll definitely hear about it when it comes out. I think it's going to get a lot of attention. And I've started the blog already. You've probably seen it on my website, Digital Crack. So people kind of get a bit of a preview of the book and some of the research that I found. So it was very difficult to keep it all under a lid.
Yes. One last question. With the type of global exposure, but in depth, on the ground, and sometimes not so great situations, in fact, often not great situations, how do you find that space to collect yourself, to stay conscious in your own life day to day? It must be, quite difficult on occasion. What is it that brings you home in terms of staying mindful, staying conscious, and taking care of you?
It's a very good question. Well, in life is also a series of trade-offs, and the work that I do is very disruptive in a way, because again, as I said earlier, something would happen on the other side of the world, and then you have to stop whatever you're doing and focus on that. But I think what really helps me, a couple of things. I'm very, very blessed with some very dedicated and kind and smart mentors. I have 3 of them. One is a married couple in New York, the other is in Toronto. And they help my compass stay very straight. And, there are times where you just get overwhelmed by things. Anyone would in this type of job. And, they've been extremely helpful and supportive of me. The second one is having that network of friends and family to support you and, encourage you on, making the time, because, I think particularly in my type of work, but also I think because of digital devices, that line between private time and work time is getting very, very blurred. You go out with people and they're checking work email, in the middle of dinner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've seen it, I'm sure. And, it's kind of blurring that wall of separation between private time and work time. So I think, we have to be very careful of that. And so the point I'm trying to make is, even in my own life, I say to myself, why don't I go to the beach for 3 days? Or why don't I go home and just, spend time with family or with friends and unplug? So that's kind of where I get my kind of motivation, where I get my guidance. Getting out there, networking as well is very important. Trying to be among people who are inspiring and who have done things as well, and that you can learn from. So, but if I can go back quickly to the story of that M817 plane crash, is that the work was absolutely exhausting, very stressful, but there was always something telling me in my mind that I'm doing this for a reason. My late aunt used to say to me, "You're always somewhere for a reason. Try to figure out what it is." And I knew why I was there, is that because I was placed here for whatever reason, but it was really to help these grieving families and nations overcome this. And to me, I felt I was in Amsterdam recently for the 5th anniversary of that plane crash and met many relatives. And they were so thankful and grateful to me. And that's when I said to myself, I kind of exhaled and said, my goodness, it was all worth it. Because again, it was a very, very stressful time. I actually, after 3 weeks, I had to go home and unplug completely and just recover and recuperate. That's how much it took out of me.
Yeah,
so
I can imagine it would. Michael, I know that sometimes with the intensity of dealing with all sorts of crises, I mean, admittedly for me, it's probably more in the corporate space or in the business space, definitely not all corporate. And I seem to find a bit of solace in yoga and meditation and walks in the fresh air and nature, just sort of unplugging in that way. Do you have a particular practice that you do on a daily basis, or something that you tap into?
I do, absolutely. So I usually, wherever I am, I have a hard stop, say 5 p.m. in that particular time zone, and I grab a bicycle and I go cycling for at least 90 minutes. And that's often times where I unplug, but also some of my best ideas start to reveal themselves. But yeah, I love living near the water. And to me, it's very, very calming and peaceful. I'm never far away from nature. Because I've done the work on this book, I'm now more conscious of, well, wait a minute. I'm on my walk or on my bike. So what I do is I actually leave my smartphone behind. And I try not to turn it on or look at it way after I've returned home. And of course, you have that part of your brain saying, oh my goodness, I might miss that perfect Instagram shot because I'm in such a beautiful place. But you know what? Life will go on without that.
It does, absolutely.
And the reward for that is I'm just taking everything in. I'm living the moment.
Yeah, and it does almost, even something as brief as you're saying, 90-minute cycling or perhaps a long walk somewhere near the water. It really does feel almost as if one has been on a bit of a holiday.
Indeed.
Michael, it's been an absolute delight talking to you.
Likewise.
And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you when you're here. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing all of that with me. Very insightful.
Yeah, and most welcome. It's a lot of fun as well. So thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Lift. I'm delighted you're here. If you'd like to connect with Michael or to read his blog, Digital Crack, head over to my website, mowbraybydesign.com, where you'll find the show notes and relevant links. Whilst you're there, don't forget to subscribe to the show in iTunes or any of your favorite platforms to never miss an episode. And if you're loving Lift, I'd really appreciate a rating in iTunes, or simply share with a friend who needs a lift. You can get in touch with me for coaching or speaking engagements by sending an email to Louise at mowbraybydesign.com or click on the contact button on my site. Until next time, lift yourself, lift another.